Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. There's a couple of different ways we can react when we hear about Flat Earth. There's usually this immediate rejection and resistance, and automatically we might cite some of the so-called facts that we've been taught and have been put into our heads over the years. And of course it would seem that the Earth's place in the universe is well known to the scientific community, and they have gracefully passed on that knowledge to us through an education system, through books and basically the established consensus that we are led to believe has come about through through certain progression or progress over decades or centuries, until we've finally arrived at what appears to be this mammoth understanding of the way things are and the world around us and our place in the universe as people on the Earth, and of course the Earth itself. So really this does have, religious-like connotations. We believe through scientific discovery that we have some very fundamental answers as to the how and the why we are here. Of course, the Big Bang, evolution, all that stuff, the theories on how the Earth and the planets were formed going around the sun, and of course the description of gravity, which holds it all together and keeps it in perpetual motion. But of course, we can then question how much of that is really knowledge, or we can even just investigate or really research, just do standard research. Nothing about this is really hidden. This is an idea that we maybe have to get out of our heads, that some people somewhere have the answers. I'd say that nobody has the answers, but you do have opportunists throughout the ages who at least understand human behavior and the way we can be educated and the way we can form beliefs and opinions and entire cultures. So of course what we see is this progression towards what is commonly referred to as a global culture, which does come with the advancement of technology and transport and logistics and of course being able to navigate across the Earth as we know it. And this would appear to give us this prowess, or when, of course, I say us, I talk about humans, and of course a lot of the time there is this feeling of we've done this, we've done that as a human race, because a handful of individuals have made certain discoveries. But when you look back at it, no one has ever made any discoveries regarding the true shape and dimensions and nature of the Earth and where it is. All we have are a bunch of assumptions based on what you could call scientific research, only as far as being able to predict when and where we'll see things happen in the sky. And so, of course, when you look back into the origins of the heliocentric model, it really is quite simple. And of course, it is based upon this idea and assumption that the Earth is going around the Sun. The Sun is used as a central point for timekeeping, the calendar, the Gregorian calendar. And it works. There is no doubt that, mankind has mastered a particular way of keeping time and is able to make some fine-tuning adjustments over the ages because of the predictive nature of what we see happening in the sky and how that affects us. The only thing that we can really say affects us is, the sun, and it's the difference it makes for the seasons, of course, and the weather. The moon, of course, does correlate to tides, but the causality there is always going to be an assumption. And like anything on or surrounding this earth, everything's interconnected. None of these things work on their own. Just like different people have different jobs to do, the luminaries all have different jobs to do. And so, yes, there is a scientific methodology when it comes to tracking the sun, moon and stars. And of course, there is a relationship between those luminaries and the earth. But that's all any of the modelling has ever been based upon. And of course, it is intrinsically linked to how you decide to measure time. And time needs a location from which to make the foundation of your measurements. So this is what we have with the heliocentric model and its intrinsic link to the Gregorian calendar or solar calendar that was adopted, I can't remember exactly when, but a few hundred years ago. So the only discovery that was ever made was were ways to tell the time, ways to predict what happens religiously in the sky and the effects it has on the earth with the seasons. And then, of course, from that predictability, you can illustrate it you have this pattern, and patterns can be illustrated in any number of ways, whether it's bar graphs or dots on paper or whatever way you would like to illustrate this model. So that's really all we have when you go back to it. So the whole point of what I'm saying here is that when we first look into flat Earth, because we've heard about it, the first thing we have to do is kind of revisit the so-called scientific explanations and assumptions that we've been given to cobble together this model of a globe Earth in a solar system over several hundred years. So what's happened over those centuries is various people of note have eventually, through a lot of thought or record keeping or data analysis, have been able to come up with some way to describe how the things we see fit into the particular heliocentric model that was adopted along with the Gregorian calendar. For example, stars, the assumed distance to stars. And this is where it becomes pseudoscience, because, of course, if we're talking about physics, then we talk about something very material which we can physically measure. For example, solid objects pressing against each other or hitting each other, colliding, creating a reaction, a very physical reaction. This, of course, is measurable and it's demonstrable. But something like the assumed distance to the stars is just that. It's an assumption, and it's been these notions of the distances are only because it has to be that way to fit the model, the heliocentric model that is presented throughout the centuries. Where the stars are and what they are has been a complete mystery, and has been quite a stumbling block for putting together the heliocentric model and having it appear whole and to answer all the questions. So we do have this very compartmentalized approach to putting together this model. As I said, the measurements, the calculations and the predictions that can be made by looking from astronomy, which is a wonderful, wondrous thing. None of this is to diss astronomy, but it's also nothing more than being able to predict what we might see in the sky, and then have this illustration of where the Earth fits into all that. And so again, looking back at how the heliocentric model came about, as I said, none of this is hidden. This is all information which we can go and find out for ourselves. It's in black and white. So, for example, Copernicus had to make many wild assumptions for this model. Rather than saying we have nothing more than a model of timekeeping, which is all it really is, we have this effort to try and interpret that as our physical reality, when time is an abstract concept anyway. And you could base your time, and it is based on, for example, the phases and the comings and goings of the moon or the seasons. But of course, again, there's no denying that being able to divide up time into minute fractions and then illustrate that with circles of 360 degrees is clever, it's smart, it's useful, it's practical. There's no denying that, but it is all still an interpretation. It is all just a mindset, a cultural mindset. So different cultures have different ways of telling the time, depending on what's useful for them. And of course, navigation became better and easier once the ability to tell the time during voyages was improved, and of course tell the time that was relative to the point of departure. So GMT, for example, which most of the world bases its time on, and all the time zones, was just a choice location, simply because of the political strength of the British Empire at the time. And of course that culture has permeated the entire world. And as timekeeping and map making was integral to all this, we know that maps have always had political leverage. So it all ties in, and it's all very well understood as well from a scientific point of view, how all of this is some kind of progress in being able to keep time and track time and make predictions. But of course, this has always been a very powerful thing for, as far as we know from the history books. I can't remember, is it supposed to be the Aztecs who worshipped the sun and would make sacrifices? Of course, it's understood that these are all assumptions in themselves, but the essence of the story there is that leaders of any particular culture at any given time are able to exercise great power and influence by being able to make predictions of, say, eclipses or celestial events. So yes, in that sense, knowledge is power, but all anyone has the knowledge of is the predictions, the model there. That's all any of these models are, is they're all based on time. And this is why the commonly used so-called flat Earth map with the center at the North Pole still matches with this predictive nature, being able to tell the time with an azimuthal equidistant map based on the North Pole, because it uses the same time system that has been introduced by the global elite. So again, it works. I keep having to say that nothing really changes in the predictive nature of all of this. Nothing changes as far as the distances go to different locations. But it doesn't dictate in any way the true dimensions of the Earth. It doesn't dictate that we're on a sphere, and it doesn't dictate that the Earth is going around the Sun. But of course, again, it's very simple. It's fundamental that if you presuppose and assume this Gregorian solar calendar and put the sun at the center of your timekeeping model, then the Earth has to be a rotating sphere. I'm sure they would have maybe gone through different modeling scenarios where the Earth is flat, because that's demonstrably and measurably how the Earth is as we experience it. So at first there may have been this continuation of the assumption of the Earth being flat, but then of course the more you think about that, you can't fit it into the heliocentric model. So we don't know the real circumstances and surrounding the people and the culture and the politics going on when these things were introduced, and but out of necessity, out of a desire to have some kind of standardized format. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, nothing inherently wrong with having a standardized format for telling the time or for navigating. It's very useful, it's very helpful. And again, there's no problem with the fact that it takes a certain mathematical acumen to be able to write this all down and come up with equations in the language of mathematics, which only ever describes the things that we see. I'm watching the sea at the moment, and it has a certain moving shape and form with the waves, and those can be described mathematically, and they can be graphed out if you like. When it comes to the randomness, the infinite randomness of each wave, that's kind of a different story. But we can model what we see or describe what we see with mathematics. And that also has its predictive qualities because because it's so systematic, and so nothing changes though, does it? We're just describing the cause and effect. You do some mathematical equations to change one kind of geometry to a different kind of geometry. This is what we find with Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry. Again, all excellent developments and progress in abstract thought, which should be celebrated. But of course, we often come across this them and us assumption. You know, those who assume that someone like myself who questions this and wants to find other answers, other to those answers that we've been given because they don't make sense. There's this belief that we are ignorant and can't do mathematics. So what? This world and the people in it are vastly different, and everyone is unique and has different skills, which are all part of one big thing. So that uniqueness and individuality is to be celebrated, regardless of one's skills or practical abilities. They're all valuable. They all have a contribution to make. So, of course, this does come down to, as well as being science, we come down to this kind of religious-like aspect of it, the belief system that enshrines the mathematics, this interpretation, and of course the attachment to this belief that these predictions that we can make and the assumptions that have been made several hundred years ago are some kind of scientific fact, when they're not. They are measurable and calculable, even when it comes to something that's being called gravity. All we're ever talking about is the passage of time. It is still all related to time, because when you're talking about gravity, you're observing how long the time it takes for a body or something to do something, and it distance over a certain period of time will give you a rate of acceleration or a speed, and so time, being able to include time in the equations is intrinsic. So really all we have with gravity is again an extrapolation of the observations that are made in the sky, and relating that to, of course, the time it takes for something to fall through the medium of air, an object with a mass. And so then we have this imaginary physics used to describe what, the predictive nature of what we see happening in the skies and with objects on the earth in terms of real physics. We have this inclusion of mass, and so the Earth's mass is factored into the equation. And it's funny because even though you factor it in with in the equation, it's written down as M1 and M2. So one mass being whatever mass you're going to drop through the air, the second mass being the Earth, the mass of the Earth itself, apparently and allegedly causing this attraction, this pull between the two masses. But ultimately in the equation, you ignore the second mass. You take the Earth's mass out of the equation. It's funny, you just assume it's there in the first place as an attractive force, and then you ignore it. You just take it out of the equation. It's again, though, all based on time, the 9.8 meters per second. So yes, all these measurements are factored in. The decimal system and the metric system is, of course, integral to it, and this all ties into timekeeping and geometry. They are all interchangeable, and this is the revolution that kind of occurred, I suppose, over the ages, was the ability to tie all these things in all these mathematical concepts in a standardized way that avoids having to make too many conversions along the way. It is rather like the development of software, if you consider that when you click your mouse or hit a key on the keyboard, a whole bunch of scripts are being processed, and what you might have in one keystroke or one mouse click now is a bundle of scripts that have been put together over time, and so many things have been included, many actions have been included into that one mouse click that was developed and added to over time. Again, all amazing stuff. There's no disrespect for the scientific achievements in that regard from very smart people, mathematicians and computer scientists. They all have contributed a huge amount. And this would lead on to something like the moon landings. And this, of course, is one of the huge beliefs that is a massive stumbling block, or even a wall that one has to climb on this journey to realizing that we are not on a spinning ball Earth. Because, of course, there is this assumption that the scientific community has it all worked out because we went to the moon. And so the physics must be correct. The fact that we were able to assume that the Earth was a globe, and of course apparently see the globe from space and land on the moon and even play golf on the moon, would appear to have been that kind of been there, seen it, done it. It's all been proven. There you go. That part of the progress that we've made over the centuries. So this, of course, is something that you have to look into, but on the surface, there's not much to it. It was obviously propaganda. It was obviously, and it could well have been in the start of this huge money laundering, money making operation that any national CEO, president or prime minister might benefit from, and cannot, would have to take on as part of their duties. All this space exploration, all this money, all this funding, created literally out of a vacuum. Yeah, so. The space program has always been a huge money spinner, so it will never be exposed for what it really is, because it will just be perpetuated. There are too many people making too much money and having too much influence, and of course creating jobs and what have you in the process. So that's just this kind of, it's nothing more than an invoice factory or conduit in which a lot of money is siphoned off. But of course, that belief that we went to the moon is hardwired into us. So this is a stumbling block, and you can get lost in investigating that. But all you have to do is look at the contradictions, look at the behavior of the people who are said to have gone to the moon, look at the rhetoric that surrounds it, look at the behavior of the people defending this belief, because what you get there is someone who's very attached to that. Again, we have this we. They feel personally responsible for going to the moon, or at least being able to understand the mathematical models that go with this exploration. It is, of course, there are many women in astronomy and space exploration, but fundamentally it's a very male thing, because there is this, I think, at the seat of it, there is this desire to spread our seed. It's very masculine in that respect, and this is probably why you have more men than women. I don't want to appear bigoted, and that's not. It's just an observation, and it's not to say that that we have different capabilities between men and women. What it means to say is that instinctively, possibly, that men are looking to spread their seed, to that's kind of like something that's possibly built into us, just like any other animal. We go seeking places to spread our seed. It's a fundamental aspect of nature. Whereas for the female, the fact that a female will give birth to young offspring, frankly, gives the female more meaning, and they have no need to seek out any more meaning than that, because that is such a precious and wonderful thing to be involved in. The man can never truly understand that, and will possibly, just through the natural way of the things are, the male will want to, won't have those. It just doesn't have that experience. So ultimately, all of this talk, all of this so-called scientific exploration of where we are, who we are, is of course trying to answer those questions, predominantly from a male perspective, because we are the ones that are lost, or are constantly seeking for a female. Having that nest is possibly forthright in the mind. This isn't assumptions. This is just, again, observation of the way things are in life. My wife will worry more about the next meal or the next day, as far as the kids go, and that's her mission in life, day by day. And for the man, it is too. For the husband, the same thing is true, but in different ways. But that's okay, because, as I was saying earlier, we need this diversity. We need each of us to have this uniqueness in order to fulfill the duties and the tasks at hand, whether that is some kind of progress that we are making. So this whole globe thing, heliocentric thing, all the entire culture, the entire global culture that surrounds us now, is what you could refer to as progress or advancement or development. But it doesn't mean that it's linear in the way that we often perceive this, especially from an evolutionary standpoint. We are possibly evolving in the same way that one person grows from being a child to an adult and eventually dying. We have experiences, we learn lessons, we reflect, we hopefully learn to, we learn something from our experiences, and so we mature and grow, and we slow or whatever with age, and we go through a very predictable kind of process as we grow, and you can equate that, yes, to the general populace, but again, it's not linear. There could be resets. There could be there just simply could be diversity. These are questions that we don't have answers to. And of course, they are questions that plague us when we start thinking about who we are, where we are, why we're here. And when we are given from an early age these answers that appear to be fact, they are engraved almost in stone and statues as fact, along with people who are celebrated for discovering certain things, then we feel that we have made progress, and it can appear very linear. So we can latch on to that. We can become very attached to that. And it is a safety net. We will then defend that corner, defend that belief, because it does rock your foundations when you start to consider that a lot of mistakes and assumptions have been made along the way that do not reflect our reality and actually do not give us any more answers than any of us have ever had, or anyone possibly will have in this very diverse universe that we find ourselves in. Ultimately, when you look at it all, if you can at least come to terms with the fact that it can be interpreted in a variety of ways, and it ultimately comes down to interpretation and beliefs and the kind of filters that we have when we process information. This is ultimately what the flat earth learning curve has been for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of others, where we've revisited the things that we've been told, we've studied and researched the physics, and this has all been part of this quest to seek more answers that resonate with us. And it can be distressing when you have this kind of death of the old persona, which is basically leaving behind those old beliefs. It becomes a shell that you leave behind. But hopefully all of us, no matter what our beliefs, are going through this kind of process in our lives. If anything, this is like some kind of training ground, some kind of place to have an experience and hopefully gain something from it. So as long as we are all on some kind of path that seeks to answer some of those esoteric questions, and then possibly come to some realizations that maybe there are no answers, but that's okay. That doesn't have to cause us suffering, and it doesn't have to have us clinging on to beliefs. Then in that sense we then become free, and maybe that's the whole point. It certainly is a mission that we have from an early age, is to become somewhat independent and free. The problem is that we get distracted on the way, and we get led to believe that there are certain material things that will apparently give us freedom and give us luxury and give us some kind of better standing in this so-called global society, when in fact the opposite is true. There are a multitude of different ways, there are infinite ways we could be experiencing this life on Earth, whatever it is, and there are infinite discoveries to be made about what this place is, and that's what all of this is. It is a quest. So I'm happy to spend time discussing it with others with a similarly curious mind, but there's no desire to convert anyone to any ulterior or alternative belief. Simply to come to that joint realization, a communal realization, that we do have ultimate freedom, and it all happens in our minds. And as long as we strive to recognize how we've been enslaved, or how we've been led to believe certain things, then we will make progress in becoming free individuals. And collectively, all those free individuals make a huge difference to our reality. Thank you very much.
Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.